I've learned some stuff since last week.
No deal. Hello, deal.
Dr. Hinson. I like this new way of setting it up. I can see the PowerPoint here.
Good. What else do we have? Oh, do you know Charlotte Beeson?
Hey,
Good morning, Charlotte. Can you hear us okay?
we've had some of
Yeah,
this.
how are you?
Yeah. You're getting popular.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Do you want us to mute?
Yes. So if you can mute yourself so that we don't get background noise, I think that helps everybody hear better. All right, we'll just wait for folks to join us.
Now they have to phone in order to get connected, or is this one a computer?
This is, so folks can use their computers.
Yeah.
If they don't have a computer, they can use their phone as well.
Okay.
So, and some folks, like you see where it says Diane's iPhone.
Yeah.
So some folks will just be audio
Oh.
and not the video. And some folks like,
they can see it by the iPhone as well.
yes.
Uh-oh.
So they
Okay.
can, yeah, it'll just be smaller, but they'll be able to see on their phone if they.
Yeah, that's amazing. This
This
technology.
technology's
Kind of overwhelming.
It is overwhelming, but in a time like right now, it's proving quite useful. But hopefully this doesn't last forever, so.
Well,
When it's time to start, could Dr. Hinson be bigger in the screen?
So
okay.
let me, do you have like, you can see the slides, right?
Right.
And then do you have like a little, either across the top of your screen or along the side, like several little pictures of people?
Yes.
Okay, let me get my computer and tell you which buttons to hit to make it different. Hang on.
If you just moved Dr. Hinson, moved the camera closer to Dr. Hinson, that would put more of him in the picture rather than all the books behind him.
Okay. So also what you can do.
You might picture me and
Yeah.
make smaller.
Let's see. So if Dale, if you have, like, do you have a strip down your computer, or do you have, or across the top of faces?
It is down the side right now.
So on that strip of things on the top,
Yes.
you'll see like some little icons. One might look like a little strip and then like a little box and maybe two boxes.
Yes, I see that.
Okay, so click on the one that is like a single box.
Okay.
And that will highlight the speaker only. And you can also, if you, I'm trying to say this. So if you can make that screen bigger and smaller by clicking on one of the corners and just dragging it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Andrea,
Yes.
can you move the camera closer to Dr. Hinson's face?
I don't know, just based on the way he has his office set up. It's pretty close. Let's see. Try scooting in just a little bit. They want to see your face. Let's see.
Okay, this is Charlotte Deason. Somehow when I tried to mute, I kicked myself out of Zoom, but not to worry, I'm on the phone and I have the slides, so I'm
Okay.
not going to do anything else.
If you want to hang up and try to connect again, that's fine with us. We've got time.
Okay.
All right, let's see. Can you scoot up a little? They want to see if we can get a better camera.
For me,
That's good. Okay. I think he is can't get any closer to his computer so that he can read the words correctly. Does that make sense, Dale?
Okay.
Yeah. So just based on how he's got it set up, I don't think I can get him much closer to his computer. All right, let's see. All right, we still got it.
The sound is better
Yeah, good.
than it was last time. I hope that'll be true for Lee's reception.
We got about 15 minutes, so I think that since folks have been practicing with Zoom, they might all come in right before.
Oh, okay. Well, it'll be hard to get 20, 25 people on there.
We'll see.
Find room for all those faces.
Well, what yours will, they'll either get much smaller,
yeah,
or you'll only see a few at a time.
right.
Andrea,
And
Yes, Amelia.
last night, we Zoomed with our niece and nephew in California.
Oh, that's fun.
That was really fun. Found out that my nephew's wife in Georgia probably had corona because there was a funeral in their town and a person came from out of town who didn't know they were sick. And apparently affected a whole lot of people in that town.
Oh, that's not good.
Yeah. You may have seen Albany, Georgia on the news because they had some things about the hospital on the news. And that's why they have such a big number of cases right there. She was not able to get tested because they don't have enough tests for everybody.
Right.
Well,
Well, my sister-in-law, I just found out yesterday, had to get tested. She's a physical therapist, so she's been in contact with tons of people. She was getting a little sick, so her company has quarantined her and has tested her. So we'll see.
everywhere.
Who's this? Andrea, who's being tested?
Oh, my sister-in-law in Houston. Don't worry, I haven't had contact with her since Christmas.
I wasn't worried about that. I was worried about your sister-in-law.
So my brother is also quarantined until they get the test results back.
Right.
And they're both in healthcare, so they're hoping they don't have it.
Yeah, our son-in-law, Sam, is just sort of operating on the assumption that he will come down with it at some point.
Right. Good morning, Barb.
Good morning. Hi, Andrea. Hi, Glenn.
Okay, what happened?
This little arrow. You'll only see a few faces at a time, and then so it doesn't take up your whole screen. All right, can everyone see the PowerPoint slides on their screen this week?
Yes.
I can, yes.
Not everybody knows what this
Oh,
is.
that's true.
Yeah, Eileen.
It was him, right there.
Who else is joining us? I don't know who that is. That's just what? I didn't vote.
That's how that works. Okay. Hi, Charlotte.
How are you?
Good.
Hey, that's
I'm
pretty cool, you
feeling-
guys. Whoops,
I'm
I'm
feeling
sorry.
very accomplished.
We
I
can
managed
enlarge.
to get into Zoom.
Yay.
That's nice that we can enlarge the print on the handouts.
Make the handout smaller.
Can't do that.
Andrew will have control of that.
Yeah, Andrew's got control of that.
Andrew, you might remind everybody to mute their computers in a little bit.
Yes.
Gloves,
Oops. She's still connecting. Good morning, Janet.
Good morning.
What's that feedback?
Yeah, I'm working on it.
Paul?
John's here. Good morning, Melinda.
Do you see us? Already? I see. Okay, touch the positive thing on your on that little picture. Yes.
Okay, Jesus Ministry in Galilee. Now,
Hang up. you see Carolyn?
Yes, I'm here.
I have unmuted my phone just to say that Carolyn and I have just walked through the process and joined. I see others that have arrived, but just wanted you to know that we're here. I am now going to mute microphone.
Okay, I have muted everyone's mic so we don't get the feedback and background noise. If you need to say something, there's a couple options. You can use the chat function, or you can just unmute yourself for a second and jump in, say what you need to say, and then mute it. All right. You got some new folks today.
Quite a bit.
You've got a class going.
Quite an adventure.
It is.
Quentin.
Yep. Good morning, Quinn. We have everybody muted right now, so if you need to say something, unmute yourself. Oh. All right.
Is anyone talking?
One great advantage of this is people can have coffee.
Good morning, Charlene.
Shall we begin? This is quite a stretch for someone my age. Marconi developed radio 2 years before I was born. And I grew up with a little teeny radio trying to get something from St. Louis, but all we could reach was Del Rio, Texas. I remember that very distinctly when we couldn't get reception any other place. And here we are, not only can we communicate by voice, but also communicate by vision. I have to admit, it is not my preference. I would prefer to be in a classroom where I could see all of you at the same time. Here I'm seeing some of you, but that's not quite like actually seeing you in the classroom. We're picking up at this point with Jesus' ministry. We've looked at his preparation, his birth, and then the important phase of his calling, working out his calling. But here with Luke 4:14, we pick up on Jesus' ministry that extends to 950 in Galilee. And then after that, he moved into Samaria and made the trek southward, strangely down to the very south of the country before coming up from Jericho to Jerusalem. That, of course, probably, as you would understand, was not something that Luke could have verified exactly. He was just working out more or less an arrangement by which people, his reader, Theophilus, who was a Roman, could understand what he was saying about Jesus, the Jesus story. Now, we pick up today with his ministry in Galilee up to what is known as Sermon on the Plain. Matthew and Luke made a different use of their sources here. Matthew seems to have incorporated almost all of the Q document in the Sermon on the Mount. Luke, on the other hand, just gave kind of an aperitif of his material from Q in his Sermon on the Plain. It's much shorter, of course, than the Sermon on the Mount. But then he scattered some of the other teaching that Jesus farther over throughout his account of Jesus' journey to Jerusalem. Now, we have to recognize, excuse me a minute, I have to get get my computer set up in the right way.
Is it?
Okay, I think it's set up now.
Is it okay?
Except for the Sermon on the Plain in 6:12 through 49, Luke drew for much of this account of Jesus' ministry in Galilee. Of course, Mark presented Jesus as a charismatic rabbi who went around doing miracles and demonstrating sources of illness, injuries, and
We're getting some pretty bad feedback.
that, we're going to find that Luke had a very different way of talking about these different problems that people ran into that we would find in Mark and in Matthew, who followed Mark more closely in that. We, of course, have very different understanding of these things, but it is worthwhile, I think, to think a little bit about what miracles were according to biblical writers. Miracles were not contrary to nature, but rather they were God using nature, using the whole creation in order to effect what they wanted to achieve. Now, we begin with Mark entering his hometown. Strikingly, Mark has there a comment about Jesus performing of miracles. This must have been a great challenge to him because he was not able to perform any miracle in his hometown except having hands laid on a few sick people, he healed them. And he marveled on account of his lack of faith. That shows you one other important element in miracles. There's the element of faith. Not everybody would see the miracle taking place. It's something that could be seen only through the eyes of faith. Now, Luke did not repeat Mark's statement, perhaps because he didn't really want Theophilus to know that there might be limitations that Jesus would experience. As Luke presented the story, Jesus got a mixed reception in his hometown. Of course, the people who knew him were awed by healings, exorcism, miracles. And initially, they were awed by his inaugural address. But we can see that he got a very negative response to the way he interpreted the scriptures as he presented them. Now, the good news came first in his hometown. Filled with the power of the Spirit, word spread through all the surrounding country about what he had been doing. Now, teaching in the synagogues, he was praised by everyone. Luke, of course, didn't present this in the way Mark did. Mark made this kind of the title or his account of the gospel. The time is fulfilled and the kingdom of God has come near. Repent and believe in the good news. Instead, Luke presented Jesus making a kind of inaugural in the synagogue in his hometown of Nazareth. Now, the hometown folks evidently had a very high expectation because of what they had been hearing about Jesus. And you'll notice he was brought up there, attended the synagogue regularly, as was his custom. All the way through, I think we will see that Jesus was an observant Jew. He was not a renegade or anything like that. People respected him enough that the Hazan, who was the leader of the synagogue handed him scriptures to read. Now, in this, we can see that Jesus was not only intelligent, but well-educated, because a reader had to read the scriptures in Hebrew and then translate into Aramaic. Jesus may also have known Greek, at least just a little bit of Greek, to conduct business with other people apart from the hometown crowd. Now, he was given one of the scrolls, which had to be the prophets, because if he'd been given a Torah scroll, he would have had to have read a prescribed text. But instead, he chose what he himself wanted them to hear, which was from Isaiah 61, 1 through 2a. I noticed the 2a here. He did not go on to read the whole of verse 2 because it had something which Luke seems to have shied at. The first part of Isaiah 61, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. But the other part is, and the day of vengeance of our God. Now, Luke was not very partial to talking about God as God of wrath, a vengeful God. That was something he shied away from. Well, the passage Jesus read is not one of the servant poems in Isaiah, which we looked at earlier, which figured very prominently in his understanding of his calling. But this text fits well the thrust of those servant poems. The Spirit of God had chosen and equipped him and appointed him as the Messiah. And anointed him. The word anoint is Greek word kreo, from which we get Christos. So Messiah was understood as the anointed one. And the thrust of the message was directed towards servanthood, to bring good news to the poor, to proclaim release to the captives, and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Now you can imagine that people there were very excited at what they were hearing. Here was Joe's boy, who had really become famous with his preaching out around various parts of Galilee. And now they were expecting him really to give them a powerful message, something that would pump them up. When he finished reading, he said, "Today the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." And you can almost see them nodding their heads and thinking, what a great guy this is. This is a joy boy. But a problem surfaced when he proceeded to challenge their thinking about the wideness of God's mercy. They wanted what he said to be applicable to them in Nazareth. And he probably picked up on that. And their attitudes quickly changed. He didn't talked to them about what great things he was going to do for them. Rather, he read their minds. Doctor, heal yourself. Do here what you did in Capernaum. He had news for them. No prophet is accepted in the prophet's hometown. And then went on to infuriate them by talking about what other prophets in Israel had done. God had sent Elijah to no one except a widow in Zarephath in Sidon. And secondly, although Israel had many lepers in the time of Elijah, he cured none except Naaman the Syrian. Now, here were people outside of Israel, and those attitudes quickly metamorphosed. The note of God's universality enraged them. But see, this is the theme of Luke's gospel. It's particularly important to him as it is not to either Mark or Matthew. They got up and drove him out of Nazareth. They led him to the brow of a hill on which the city was built and intended to hurl him off of a cliff. Luke doesn't explain how it happened, but Jesus passed through the midst of them and went on his way. Evidently, he still had a few friends who were willing to accept him. Well, where we go from there? The best place probably was Capernaum. And Jesus, the rest of Jesus' ministry in Galilee would center on Capernaum. Capernaum was a good place because it was located on the Sea of Galilee. And you had a larger number of people who were coming back and forth. Of course, the central industry there was fishing. And it's interesting that in Isaiah 9, 1 and 2, this region, though not the city of Capernaum, was spoken of as the land of the Gentiles. Remember, Luke, the thrust of Luke's gospel was support for Paul's mission to the Gentiles. And this center jibed with his concept of his ministry. Now, in the synagogue at Capernaum, he again amazed people with his teaching, with the authority with which he taught. Remember, this was not someone who had gone to a seminary, who had studied at the feet of a famous rabbi like Gamaliel II, as Paul did. But here was someone who evidently had a deep insight into Scripture and also was able to relate to where people were. It seemed like Luke was here trying again to help Theophilus, this Roman, to understand about this, because where in Mark we simply have a statement that he went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. Luke added the explanatory note. You went down to Capernaum, a city in Galilee, and was teaching them on the Sabbath. Well, the Theophilus, a Roman, would not have known about this kind of thing, especially the geography of Galilee. It's entirely possible he was an official of someplace like Achaia, where Corinth was located, or even Rome. Well, Luke worded the reaction to Jesus' teaching a little differently. Mark recorded they were astounded at his teaching. Luke simply said they were astounded at his teaching, for he spoke with authority. Maybe just a simplification of the way it was said by Mark. Luke would later have plenty of encounters with those who were more specialists in scriptures. The first healing, which is taken over from the gospel according to Mark, and as I've already narrated, Luke did recount a high percentage of the miracle stories in the gospel according to Mark. Here in the synagogue, we have a healing of a man described by Mark as possessed of an unclean demon, unclean spirit. But Luke described him as having the spirit of an unclean demon. Now, the use of the word demon would fit with the Roman psychology as over against the Greeks, the Hebrew psychology. In Hebrew thought, every person is indwelt by Yetzer HaTov, a good spirit, and a Yetzer Haba, an evil spirit. And there's a struggle that goes on between those two. It's similar to what we have described by Paul in Romans 7. But in Luke's day, the average Roman thought about illnesses as being a result of demons. In every person dwells a good demon or a bad demon. And there was this kind of contest that would be similar to the Hebrew thought, but they used different language for it. Christians later would describe demons, all demons, as evil. Drink a glass of water, you swallow a demon and you get sick, whether physically or mentally. Luke presented Jesus in this story as Lord over demons. In this instance, he repeated almost verbatim Mark's account with major variation of spirit and demon. Now, we probably interpret this today as psychological disorder of some kind. When Jesus came, this demonic cried out, "The Holy One of God." And Jesus exorcised the demon with command, "Be silent," and come out of him. The demon came out without having done any harm. Now, in Mark, the demonic had a more powerful experience, convulsing, crying out in a loud voice. He came out of him. Jesus' ability to prevail over evil spirits or demons evoked the same kind of incredulous response as his preaching had. What kind of utterance is this? Well, with authority and power, he commands the unclean spirits, and out they come. This amazed people. Of course, there were rabbis in his day who performed miracles like this. There were healers among the rabbis. So it is not unknown, but it was probably remarkable that here was someone not a rabbi and not a recognized religious authority who was performing miracles like this. And so report of his authority spread throughout the whole region. Now, Mark did not have to describe anything very specific here, but Luke had to be a little more specific, trying to help Theophilus understand the geography of Galilee. The second miracle is the healing of Simon Peter's mother-in-law. Luke has omitted some details that we have in Mark about those who accompanied Jesus, including Andrew, Peter's brother, James, and John. Maybe that's because he had not mentioned the calling of disciples. Already, Mark had recounted the calling of not only Peter, but also Andrew and James and John. Mark described Peter's mother-in-law's illness and healing as just a fever. Luke related she was suffering from a high fever. And their way of describing it differed just a little bit. Jesus took her by the hand and lifted her up, according to Mark. According to Luke, he stood over her and rebuked the fever, which would again be rebuked to the demon which was causing the fever. Matthew has also a different version. His maybe relating for people who were newly converted, trying to be introduced to Christianity. They all three recorded the same outcome in slightly different ways. In Luke's perspective, as in Paul's, the Holy Spirit imbued the Messiah with authority and power manifest in his teaching and healing ministry. You see, that's what Paul claimed about his ministry to different places. He would come with power, with authority. Well, then there was the healing of a slew of sick people. Both Matthew and Luke paraphrase Mark rather than cited him exactly on this. Luke eliminated some of Mark's duplication, but omitted one interesting observation by Mark. The whole city was gathered around the door. Jesus was drawing a great crowd to these remarkable things that were happening in his life. Luke added a tidbit about Jesus' method of healing not found in Mark, and I think this is illuminating to us about the understanding of miracles. Mark reported that Jesus healed many sick, cast out demons. Luke says that he laid hands on each of them and cured them. There was this emphasis on individualized care. In the book of Acts, laying on hands meant to confer the Holy Spirit. What Jesus was doing was being done by the Spirit of God. And I think of it as outpouring love energies by which these things are happening. Luke described more graphically than Mark the effort of Jesus to preserve the secret of his messiahship. One of the features of the gospel according to Mark is what we call the messianic secret. According to him, Jesus would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. Now, Luke visualizes an open conflict between Jesus and the demons indwelling the sick. Demons also came out of many shouting, "You are the Son of God," especially a way to describe who Messiah was. He rebuked them and would not allow them to speak because they knew that he was the Messiah. But Luke didn't spend a lot of time talking about the messianic secret. That was something peculiar to the gospel according to Mark. Well, we have following that a reassuring of his disciples and affirming of his calling. Both Luke and Mark recognize Jesus' need to withdraw after these sessions. Like most of us, he was liable to periods whenever his energies were completely sapped by what he was doing. Exposure to human need was too much. He left Capernaum and went to a deserted place, according to Mark, and there he prayed. Now that's very interesting because Luke is the gospel which emphasized prayer more than any other, but he missed this opportunity to add that point, that is what Jesus did. He withdrew for a time of retreat, of meditation, to prepare himself to be re-energized like a battery that you ground down on in cold weather. It had to be allowed time in order to regenerate, draw back together. The people were kept asking, searching for Jesus, even as he withdrew. They couldn't get enough of his authoritative teaching and healing. He had to disappoint them, though, because he had a more expensive home. According to Mark, he replied to their entreaty, "Let us go to the neighboring town, so that I may proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came to do." Luke phrased this a little differently, but with much the same intent. I must proclaim the good news of the kingdom of God to the other cities also, where I was sent for this purpose. Whereas Mark presented Jesus as preaching in synagogue, casting out demons throughout Galilee, Luke broadened his ministry a little bit at this time, proclaiming the message in the synagogues of Judea, which means that he extended his ministry beyond Galilee, although this was mainly in Galilee. That jives with the Gospel of John. According to the Gospel of John, Jesus spent much more time in Judea. His ministry focused much more on Judea than on Galilee. He spent very little relating anything that involved Jesus' hometown and the people immediately around him. The fact is, Jesus' ministry did not remain focused on his home turf in Galilee, but it went beyond that. Some later manuscripts coordinated Mark and Luke by changing Judea to Galilee. Judea is probably correct as the harder reading. If anybody changed, it would likely be someone who would see Judea and think, that couldn't be right. He was in Galilee at this time, and the ministry is focused on Galilee. Well, Jesus here was quickly put in a position where he recognized a need to prepare disciples who would serve, especially to facilitate his ministry. And I entitled this part of Luke 5, 1 through 11 as Catching Fish and Fishers of Humankind. It began with his teaching a crowd from the boat at Gennesaret. Gennesaret is another name for the Lake of Galilee. It was actually a section to the northeast of the Sea of Galilee, but some people thought of the lake as being Gennesaret or Gennesaret, different spellings for that. Now, Luke had earlier bypassed the calling of disciples. That was prevented very starkly in Mark at the very beginning of his gospel, 1:16 through 20, where Jesus had appealed to Peter, James, John as he passed along on the Sea of Galilee in a very peremptory way. He used exclamations rather than nouns. These are not nouns, but exclamations. Here, behind me, and I will make you fishers for people. And what was characteristic, they abruptly dropped their nets and followed him. Now, we have to think here that Luke, for some reason, thought that that was too early or something. That Mark was presenting a calling of disciples before people got acquainted with Peter, James, and John, and the others who eventually became his disciples. And here, of course, as it came to Capernaum and his ministry in Capernaum, he would be more acquainted with them. He would see them regularly fishing in their boats. So as a crowd gathered in the surrounding area, he put himself in the best position to address them by stepping into one of the boats, Simon's, and asking Simon to move it a ways outward. That was put him in a position where everybody could see him. And then when he finished, he asked Simon to move further out to deep water and let his nets down for a catch. Now Simon thought, oh man, this guy knows nothing about fishing. I fished all night and didn't catch anything. Here he is wanting me to drop nets down the same place I've been dropping them all night. Well, he protested. Master, we have worked all night long, but have caught nothing. Now, a Greek word for master is epistata. That's another accommodation to Theophilus, who spoke Greek and did not understand Aramaic or Hebrew or other things like that, and would not have known well enough the Old Testament to have known what kurios meant. Mark referred to him as, used the word kurios. Now, instead of Luke, Peter said, Master, we have worked all night long, but have caught nothing. But he respected Jesus enough to begrudgingly go along. Yet, if you say so, I will let down the net. They had a miraculous catch of fish. I don't think we can ever explain any of these miracles, things happening like this. Not unbelievable, though, that somebody would know where a school of fish might be. You wouldn't expect it of someone who is not a fisherman, but a carpenter, to know where a lot of fish would be. But at any rate, this act of faith paid off. They pulled up so many fish that they had to call on the other boat, which had James and John in it, to come over and help them. And both boats filled up and were starting to sink. There were so many fish. Peter responded with a little fear, perhaps, falling down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man." Respect their master had changed to reverence. Lord. It was something that perhaps put Peter in a special understanding, gave him a special understanding. And sensing Peter's fear, Jesus reassured him, "Stop being afraid. From now on, you will be fishing for a human being." That's very close to the Greek itself. Stop being afraid. He recognized that Peter was afraid. He was maybe shaking, being overwhelmed by this. Now, they referenced then to Jesus as Lord, maybe shows some advance in Luke's Christology, because the word kurios in Greek was the word used to translate Yahweh, the 4 letters that were used to express the name of God in the Hebrew Bible. This was the earliest Christian confession of faith. Jesus is Lord. We find it expressed in Romans 10:9. Well, then you have, following that, Luke perhaps seeing this being a propitious time for Jesus to be calling certain persons in a special way as his disciples. We have him sort of singling out an awestruck Peter, James, and John. Now, one wonders why Luke did not rely on Mark's account of the calling of the first disciples, as Matthew did. It's probably not something we can explain. Maybe he had a wonderful story, didn't quite know what to do with it, and he needed some place to throw it in there. It connected with these followers, these important first disciples. But that seems unlikely, given the intentional way he used Mark. It is more likely he thought Mark related the calling of disciples too soon, before Jesus would have known Peter, James, and John. And Mark, Jesus hadn't really gotten started in his ministry. He hadn't had time to gain a ministry. He did that very impulsively. In Luke, Jesus' teaching and healing ministry were well underway, and this story supplied him with a rationale for that. At any rate, that's the way I think of it coming in at this late point. Now, the next major series of this part of his ministry, he came under fire, 5:12 to 6:11 in Luke. Luke joined Mark in recording the healing of a leper and a palsied man, the call of the tax collector Levi, and a series of disputes with religious authority. So a lot of what is here was dependent on Mark. As Luke understood, Jesus had barely gotten started in his ministry and teaching, however, before opposition reared its head, not merely that of his hometown folks, but there were others who began to question claims of authority in particular that stood over against the rabbinic approach to religion, the emphasis that they made on the rules, the halakot. These ultimately led to efforts to put a quietus on Jesus' activity and resulted in plots on his life. At this stage, his popular personality kept his critics at bay from taking serious steps to stop him. We have first the healing of a leper. Leper was undoubtedly one of the worst diseases of Jesus' day. We can understand a little bit about this. The authorities quarantined Jesus, afflicted with leprosy, and others shunned him. They had to remain isolated, forced to live away from others, to beg for a living. Neither Mark nor Matthew nor Luke had a clear picture as to where this leper met Jesus. Mark associated with it with Jesus' preaching tour in Galilee. Matthew, as Jesus descended from the mount at the conclusion of the Sermon on the Mount. Luke in one of the cities. So obviously it was an account that floated around, didn't have a particular context. Luke depended heavily on Mark for his account, however, especially the dialogue between Jesus and the leper. He gave a more graphic description of the man as full of leprosy and of the impulsiveness of his his entreaty. Whereas Mark and Matthew observed that he kneeled, Luke said he fell on his face and begged him. Obviously, someone here who Luke believed had a tremendous desire to have this leprosy changed. In all three versions, however, the leper expressed complete trust in Jesus' ability to heal him. The key, one of the two key elements in a miracle. A miracle is God working through nature, but second is the faith that one can see the hand of God at work and what has happened. If you choose, you're able to cleanse me. Mark alone described Jesus as responding out of compassion, but all three evangelists agreed on Jesus' response. He stretched out a hand and touched him and said, I do choose, be made clean. Now that showed a great deal of faith on Jesus' part. because people did not touch lepers. That was too risky. There was too much danger that would be transferred to you. It's in the same way we have this distance we try to maintain at our time. But Jesus touched him and said, I do choose, be made clean. Reaching out had great importance. And immediately the leprosy left him and he was made clean. On that, Luke repeated the first statement. The leprosy left him. Matthew repeated the second. He was made clean. Now, once again, here you can see Jesus always attending to the fact that he ought not to contravene imperiously the rules that were set out. And he wanted the leper not to tell what had happened, but show himself to a priest to make an offering for his purification as Moses commanded. Again, you see Jesus, an observant Jew, who knew Torah. In a lengthy instruction concerning lepers in Leviticus 13 and 14, the priest was to determine whether the leper was fully cured, and then to slaughter one or two clean living birds and sprinkle the blood on the person and pronounce him clean and set the other bird free. That's an interesting approach to the whole thing. But Jesus, you see, thought that at any rate, the leper could get confirmation, and in accordance with the law of Moses, should get an affirmation from a priest. So that forestalled somewhat criticisms and attacks Jesus would soon encounter from Pharisees and scribes, guardians of orthopraxy. Yet, as one might expect, word of the healing spread abroad and attracted many crowds to hear him and be cured of their diseases. Mark reported that Jesus could no longer go into town openly, but stayed out in the country, and people came to him from every quarter. I probably had to stay there in town, away from town, because he might run into some of those authorities. But in Luke's view, he withdrew in favor of a retreat to pray, like he had experienced in his calling. Now, he did the same thing with reference to his ministry. He would withdraw to deserted places and pray. He needed to recharge his batteries, just like we do. Now, this would kind of escape from criticism would run into a problem with reference to healing a paralytic in a synagogue. Again, though, the healing itself is a dramatic demonstration of the connection between faith and healing. In this instance, Jesus seemed deliberately to ignite criticism from scribes and Pharisees who were in the crowd of those who came to hear him. Mark located the event in his return home to Capernaum. Luke simply refers to it one day when he was teaching. But Luke set the stage for Jesus' controversy with Pharisees and teachers of the law who had come from every village of Galilee and Judea and from Jerusalem. You see, at this point, Luke believed that he was attracting attention from authorities as far away as Jerusalem itself. They aroused suspicion. At their presence, Luke, notwithstanding, Luke said, the power of the Lord, the dunamis of the Lord. That's the very same word that Paul used in his insistence in 1 Corinthians on the way he might come to deal with some of them in Corinth. The dunamis of the Lord is with him to heal. Well, I think of that power as God's love energy. God is love. God's love energies brought this world into being. God's love energies sustain this world, directed towards some meaningful end. And those love energies were flowing through Jesus to enable him to effect these miracles that are happening here. What he was doing, the miracles he was performing, did not rest in him. He was not one of these holy roller charismatic preachers or someone like that. You know, somebody invited, insisted on his congregation meeting last Sunday. About 1,000 people. He laid hands on some, and 2 people ended up having coronavirus. The power didn't flow through him quite in the way the power flowed through Jesus here. But at any rate, in Pauline language, God was in Christ. And both Mark and Luke spark our imagination. Such a crowd pressed around Jesus so closely that the 4 persons who carried the paralytic couldn't get through to lay him at Jesus' feet. You know, they had the doors jammed, everything. Every space in the house was filled. So they had to carry this paralytic up to the roof of the house and let him down with his bed through the tiles into the middle of the crowd in front of Jesus. That means they had to dig through the clay that held the tiles together in order to take some of them out to allow this bed to be let down there. It's a very touching story. It shows, of course, the tremendous love that they must have had for this paralytic. Now, Mark explained more fully that they removed the roof of Jesus. And after having dug through it, they let down the mat on which the paralytic lay. It fits with what we know of Palestinian houses. They had flat roofs. They were tiled with mud bricks, which would allow digging. And Jesus interpreted this as clearly an expression of faith on their part. His response, friend, your sins are forgiven. Took scribes and Pharisees, and undoubtedly the paralytic and his carriers by surprise, as it may you also. Now, Dale raised this question about the relationship of sin to healing and to illnesses and what happened. And there were people in Jesus' day who believed that there is a direct connection, that the reason someone has an illness is has suffered some terrible injury or something like that is because they have sinned. And we have some of that implied here in the hostility to Jesus. But in Jesus' understanding, there is not a direct connection between us. It may be that someone does something that is terribly wrong that results in continuing chronic illness of some kind throughout one's life. But nevertheless, as in the gospel according to John, we have to recognize that this connection should not be directly made. That as in the case of the paralyzed man recorded in John 9, neither he nor his parents had done anything wrong. This is done so that the work of God, the hand of God, could be seen in it. Well, at any rate, Jesus forgave sin. And Jesus, of course, would not disagree with the rabbis that only God can forgive sin. That's true. His critics failed to recognize who he was. He was not just another rabbinic miracle worker. He acted on God's behalf and could prove it. Is it easier to say your sins are forgiven or stand up and walk? But so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sin, I say to you, stand up and take your bed and mark them out and go home, go to your home. The paralytic immediately got up, picked up his bed, went home, glorifying God. Well, I've recounted here what I've already referred to. I think the answer to whether or not there's a connection between sin and illness is only true in some instances. It's not a direct equation that we ought to make. Instead, we should recognize that it is at times illnesses, injuries, horrifying things that happen, as they do to almost all people before they die, is not about sin at all. Neither this man nor his parents have sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. Well, so that it would better be thought of as with a result that the work, God's works, might be revealed in him. The notable thing is that Jesus restored his health without judging. He didn't simply utter a few encouraging words. He healed him and sent him home. The healing left the crowd, unlike the religious authorities, open mouthed. According to Mark, they said they had never seen anything like it. According to Luke, they remarked, we have seen strange things today, paradoxes today. Well, then if Jesus had not ignited a real hostility, maybe fear even on the part of the religious authorities, the call of Levi invited more controversy. Now, Levi was probably Matthew. And again, a good argument has been made by Edgar Goodspeed that Matthew was really the author of the gospel according to Matthew. I don't know whether that is true or not. It seems a little unlikely that Levi would have lived that long. But quite clearly it would be someone who really had a good understanding of what Jesus was about, what his teaching was about. Jesus, of course, had already very quickly gained a reputation as a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Hardly any in Jesus' days surpassed them at the bottom of Jewish social opinion. They were like prostitutes. They were absolutely despicable. They collected taxes for the Roman and extorted some for themselves. The Gospels usually speak of tax collectors and sinners in the same breath. Now, what implication can we draw from Jesus calling a tax collector as one of his core disciples, ultimately one of the 12 disciples? As this story makes clear, it raised the status of Levi just as it did that of Zacchaeus as Jesus passed through Jericho. I've already referred to the Zacchaeus story, how Zacchaeus had hurried ahead, scrambled up the sycamore tree in order to look down, and then was overwhelmed by Jesus asking him to eat at his house. And he must have just bursted buttons with elation. Like Peter and Andrew, James and John, Levi did the right thing. He left everything and followed him. Now that must have been hard for a tax collector to have left everything. You see, the rich youth could not do that. Others could not, who had wealth, could not do that. But Levi did. He immediately arranged a banquet for the new leader, and the guests included a large crowd of tax collectors and others. Now, a company like that immediately put Jesus at risk, suspect in the eyes of religious bigwigs. The Pharisees and scribes complained to the disciples, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" If he were what he was reputed to be, he should avoid society's pariahs. Jesus answered for them, giving his perspective on his mission. Those who are well have no need of a doctor, but those who are sick. I have come to call not the righteous, but sinners to repent. As in the case of his stay in Zacchaeus' house, he focused more specifically on the mission. Today, salvation has come to this house because he too is son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost. That's why he could include someone like Levi, so badly tainted by the occupation he had. Well, Then we have the criticism of Jesus' disciples' behavior versus the behavior of the disciples of John the Baptist. And Luke envisioned the question about fasting as a sequel to the sharp exchange between Jesus and the Pharisees and their scribe at Levi's party. Diverging though from Mark's suggestion that occurred on a separate occasion. According to Matthew, John's disciples sought Jesus out and broached the issue with him. According to Mark, both the disciples of John and the Pharisees confronted him with it. Now, on the other hand, this is very critical in Luke's time, because Luke was aware of John the Baptist's sect, people who were followers of John, who did not subscribe to the teaching of Jesus or did not think of Jesus as being the Messiah. In this day, of course, fasting was done by almost all Jews for various reasons. It confirmed the seriousness of their devotion. In the case of John the Baptist's followers, it had eschatological implications. Like Qumran, it was preparing them for the inbreak of the kingdom of God. And since Jesus had close connection with John, John's disciples expected him and his followers show the same level of piety. His followers' careless disregard for this discipline betrayed in their minds the deficiency of Jesus' whole enterprise. You see, they should be getting ready for the inbreak of the kingdom. Well, Jesus' reply showed the difference between his movement and John the Baptist's movement. The fault was in their eschatology. Jesus and his disciples weren't looking forward to the breaking in of the kingdom. As John and his followers, or the people at the ascent at Qumran were. No, the kingdom had already broken in and was present in Jesus himself. In his response, he drew on a wedding analogy. While the bridegroom is present with them, can the wedding party fast? No, they should celebrate. They should dance. They should eat. They should do all these things that are expressions of this joyful occasion. And in Jesus' view, already the new age for which they eagerly awaited was there. Yet, and I must look forward, he went on to say, the time would come when the bridegroom would be taken from them. Then they would fast. So early Christians would pick up again the fasting. That would be the expectation of the return of Christ. Well, as we've already learned, that parables were Jesus' principal way of responding to his critics. Other rabbis employed them too, for story was the typically Hebrew teaching method, whereas the Greeks used logic, rational proof for things. The Hebrew scholars, the rabbis, would tell stories about things. Within the story is a truth that one has to get a hold of. Now, only Luke referred to the two analogies used here as parables. Parables are not really, they're more extended than these two, but yet we can see how they responded to this argument. Both Mark and Matthew launched right into the two analogies. New patch on an old garment, new wine in an old wineskin. In defense of Luke, we should probably recognize that these two responses are somewhat more intricate than simile. Perhaps his use of the word parable underscored Jesus' effort to say, the old has passed away and the new has come. Of course, neither of these two analogies will register very clearly in our present American setting, in which we do not store wine in skins. I guess most are stored in bottles. And we hardly ever sew patches on old garments. If we do, we probably try to find an old garment to sew on an old garment because of the effect. We store wine in vats, casks, or bottles. We throw old garments away and buy new ones. Nonetheless, Jesus sharpened this point about the old age present in himself. If you put new wine in old hardened skins, the fermenting of the wine will be too much for the old skins. It will pop them. So too, if you sew a piece of cloth, a new piece of cloth on an old garment, when you wash it, the new pieces will stretch and rip the old, or quite possibly wrinkle and twist it into strange shape. On analogy to both of these, the kingdom breaking in Jesus will be too much for the old age with hardening of the arteries. See? That's basically the problem. The kingdom, God's personal presence is becoming manifest in the end. It's too much for things to go on the way they were. You should not try to force this new and powerful reality to conform to what has been. Luke added here a further word neither in Mark nor Matthew. And no one after drinking old wine desires new wine, but said, the old is good. In this context, that could hardly mean Jesus putting a stamp of approval on the old. More likely, it was criticism of pious conservatism, with its propensity for holding on to the way grandpa and grandma did things. Jesus' challenge is be attentive to what God is doing now. In this age, calls on us to be aware, to be attentive. Well, if what we've talked about so far has not been enough, working on the Sabbath would bring out the hackles of the scribes and Pharisees. The guardians of orthodoxy were keeping Jesus and his disciples under close surveillance. Jesus probably observed the Sabbath as most devout Jews did, but he did not do so strictly enough to meet Pharisaic standards, where, they had so many yards you could go, you could walk on the Sabbath so that you would not work. Well, neither Mark nor Luke set the exact time and place, but both describe Jesus and his disciples going through a week. As they did, the hungry disciples plucked some of the grain, hid the wheat, and rubbed their hands together to release the grain so that they could eat it. Now, eating on the Sabbath is not a problem, but working was just a little friction in your hand. Observant Jews prepared meals a day ahead so they would not have to work on the Sabbath. In threshing the grain, the disciples showed a disregard for the raison d'etre of Sabbath as a day resting as God did on the Sabbath. The Pharisees' question, therefore, did not come as a surprise. Why are you doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? Jesus' reply, as in other controversies, came from scriptures and reveals again the subtlety of his argument in handling them. His argument might not have had the weight of a citation from Torah, but the prophets, in this case, 1 Samuel 21, 1-6, would have carried considerable force because of the invoking of David. The curious thing is the story Jesus cited did not involve the Sabbath, the major concern of the accuser. It did establish, however, his major point that the rules had to be treated flexibly and not rigidly. In this story in 1 Samuel 21, 1-6, David demanded bread for his young troops. Ahimelech, the priest of Nob, explained that he had only the bread of the presence, that is consecrated bread, which he could not give if the young man, he could give only if the young man had kept themselves from women. That's very interesting. That there had to be a certain purification, I guess. David assured him that troops on an expedition did not have contact with women. And anyway, their vessels were holy when it is a common journey. How much more holy then would they be at this time when they were hungry, I guess? Consequently, the priest gave them the consecrated bread reserved for priests alone, for there was nothing else to give. Well, again, you see here the problem of trying to reply to that. Luke and Matthew both omitted a part of Jesus' summation in Mark. The Sabbath is made for humankind and not humankind for the Sabbath. But both ended with Jesus' strong dictum: the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Why did they think it carried loosening of Sabbath rules too far? It suggested a very secular and even an egocentric view of the calendar. Are we human beings the ones who should do whatever we want to do on the rest established by God? Not humankind, but the Son of Man, God's advocate and emissary, is the one who should make such judgment. Well, if that Sabbath issue wasn't enough of a problem, healing on the Sabbath was another one in which maybe Jesus had better grounds for his argument. The evangelists do not indicate the location of the synagogue, but we can see again how prominent synagogues were in Jesus' ministry. The synagogue was where a study of scriptures and application of them to life took place. Understandably, it was also the community within which Pharisees and other religious leaders guarded the orthopraxy, right practice of faith. So this is where the trouble would arise. Jesus' visit to this synagogue set him up for further controversy, triggered by the presence of a man with withered right hand. Well, one can almost see that trouble was going to arise. Mark and Matthew are not very specific, but Luke names scribes and Pharisees as his questioner. They were looking for something to accuse him of. According to Matthew, his critics openly demanded to know, is it lawful to cure on the Sabbath? In Luke, Jesus read their mind, as he did frequently. He'd tell by body language, probably. In response, he directed the man to stand in front of him. He then framed the question. I ask you, is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save life or to destroy? Now, put that way, that was more of a poser than they had in mind. For them, the emphasis lay on the rules for the Sabbath. And the way Jesus framed the issue, it had to do with mercy and compassion. According to Mark, Jesus looked at them with anger and was grieved at their hardness of heart. But Luke, probably hesitant to ascribe anger to Jesus, omitted that statement. When they didn't respond, he replied with a demonstration, told the man to stretch forth his withered hand. When he did so, the hand was restored. Point proven. Mercy and compassion trump Sabbath rule. Luke used the Greek organo only twice in the gospel and not at all in Acts. You find this along with judgment as things that Luke tried to steer away from. In 3:7, he quoted John the Baptist warning about the wrath of God. 21:23 referred to the wrath of God coming at the end. But otherwise, you can see why this gospel was popular with the someone who had grave sins, who needed maybe a more tolerant view of things. Well, at any rate, Jesus' response didn't go over well with the suspicious Pharisees. According to Mark, the Pharisees went out and immediately conspired with the Herodians against him to destroy him. Matthew omitted the Herodians. Luke did not refer to Herodians either, perhaps because they had close ties to the Romans and thus to avoid alienating Theophilus. Instead, he depicted intense emotion on the part of the adversary. They were filled with fury and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus. Their hostility would intensify as he continued his ministry, and he drew people from everywhere. Well, then there is, in this section, selecting of the 12. First of all, prayer and election of the 12. You will notice Luke skips past Mark's account of the healing a multitude of people in order to recount Jesus' naming of the 12 as apostles. Apostle explanation of that was the importance he ascribed to Jesus' withdrawal to pray prior to critical moments in his ministry. In Luke's estimation, Jesus surely considered the selection of 12 as one of the most important, if not the most important moment in his ministry up to that point. Mark says only he went up the mountain, not mentioning prayer. Luke elaborated, during those days, he went out to the mountain to pray, and he spent all night in prayer to God. In Luke's view, Jesus had an intense desire and need for communion, communication, or conversation with God. That necessitated retreat from the press and struggle of teaching, healing, defending his ministry, and meeting human need wherever or in whatever form he found it. He had the same human need of checking things out with God that you and I have. Now we come to this question: why the 12? And why this 12? Well, why did Jesus choose 12? Why did he choose the ones he did? If we read Matthew, Mark, and Luke carefully, we can see that a huge and diverse array of people counted themselves among his disciples. Luke especially called attention to women. Some women provided much of the things that Jesus and his followers needed for their trips. Many whom he healed, restored to sight, cured of leprosy, freed from mental illness, surely counted themselves among his disciples. Why did he identify 12, call them apostles, and send them out to pursue his mission? One reason is obviously 12 had immense symbolic importance for Israel. There were 12 tribes, the foundation for Israel under the old covenant. 12 apostles would be the foundation not for a new Israel, but for Israel under a new covenant. Now, scholars have questioned whether this idea originated with Jesus or was something early Christians read back into the story. Could Jesus have brought up the number 12? I don't know. He read his Hebrew Bible enough that it would be pretty natural for it to happen. The most obvious indication that this idea went back to Jesus himself is found in Luke, in the Last Supper. Particularly, this cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. And you know, the new covenant is mentioned only in Jeremiah 31 through 33. But the idea of a new covenant, a new period in Israel's existence as people of God would be found in others like Isaiah and so on. A second reason is evident in the naming of the 12 apostles and their sending to do what Jesus himself was doing: teaching or preaching, healing, etc. The word apostle means a messenger or one sent on a mission, and was not always restricted to the 12. Jesus, Paul contended that he merited the name too, as others who chose it. Jesus was sending the ones he named on a mission to Israel, A little later in Luke, of course, he would send the 70, symbolizing the mission to the nation. Now, why these 12? And I'm sorry, I've noticed I'm running over time here, but you can hardly believe how many of these slides that I have actually. Why these 12? Was it their willingness to sever all other ties and follow, as in the case of Peter, James, John, and Levi? Or did they show up more often and display greater zeal? We probably can't say from this list, which curiously included 2 revolutionaries, Simon the Zealot and Judas Iscariot, one of the Sicarii, the most radical of the zealots. Spending all night in prayer ahead of this lottery was wise. You don't have to wonder why he spent all night in prayer. Just think about the people that he had to choose from. Even then, not all churches turned out well, as in the case of Judas. Luke could have had another reason for shifting the election of the 12. According to the account of Mark as well as Luke, Jesus went up the mountain to pray and choose the 12. In Luke's arrangement, Jesus came down from the mountain with the disciples. Perhaps Luke didn't want readers to think that the Sermon on the Plain applied only to the 12, and he turned the healing of the multitude into an introduction to the Sermon on the Plain. Well, this was the time of the Sermon on the Plain. It would be brought in Luke 6:12 to the end of chapter 6. And it's something that we'll deal with next time, along with the Sermon on the Mount. We will see how these two compare with one another. Now, you might have some questions again, and as you know, with my deafness, it's better if you can write those maybe at the bottom of your computer in order to allow me to access them in some way to see what you're asking.
You've got a couple questions.
Okay. I see myself now.
Right here is
Okay,
the first
here.
one from Dale.
Oh, okay, from Dale to everyone. Dr. Hinson commented about the passage in Leviticus where the priest could determine whether the leper was clean. Why do you think the sacrifice of a bird would make any difference? Why did God, through Moses, develop the sacrificial system in the first place? Well, I do not think that God really was interested in the sacrificial system, frankly. I think that it was human beings who found it as a way to be able to express themselves, to express their religion. And it developed gradually from early, well before the Hebrews ever came into existence. Don't just think of one people who had sacrificial system. You have to see it as almost universal thing. And it's something that we have to think really about. Obviously, it was not something that would have been important in Jesus' home life except with reference to self-giving, as in Romans 12:2, present yourself as a living sacrifice, as a living offering to God, rather than as a something that continues the system that existed before. Then Dale again, why do we not now reevaluate the value of Sabbath practices, or at least considering it holy time? Should we view Sunday as the new Sabbath? I'm very conscious that today, the busiest day at Kroger's is Sunday, which means what a transition our society has undergone. You know, we once had blue laws which prohibited grocery stores and places like that from operating on Sundays. But our culture has been overtaken by business. And our major concern is making money on whatever day you may exist. And therefore, I think it would be very appropriate for us in some way to recover Sabbath, simply because we humans need a day of rest. In the same way that the Bible envisions God as needing a day of rest. And therefore, I'm among those who have written articles and made arguments in favor of doing something that would encourage us to observe more of a day, not only of rest for ourselves, but of attentiveness to God. And not too much of what we do is self-preoccupation. We're almost all Donald Trumps at one time or another, where we can only think of ourselves and don't give a fig for anybody else or the world or anything around us. Maybe that's a little too much to charge us with, but I'm afraid it's true. And I could wish it were otherwise. How many of you think that Sabbath we ought to have some kind of observance like Sabbath on Sunday, any other day? You think that we ought really to be serious about our seventh day, the day of the Lord? For us, for early Christians, it quickly became the day of the Lord. That's the day of resurrection. I just present that. And Quinn Chapley has said the coastal Semitic people counted in base 12. A dozen to 10 is Phoenician in origin. 12 times 12 is the growth. These are archaic. Icro pointed to Israel first developing an amphictyony of 12 with one tribe in charge of altar service for each moon phase. Yeah, well, I don't think that we would necessarily be bound by the number. Think of it as obligatory from God that we have 12 apostles, because early Christianity had far more than 12. And there were far more disciples of Jesus. Women, we actually have one woman identified as an apostle in Romans. And other early Christian observances, I think you could have women. You could we certainly ought not to think of only the 12 apostles as being foundation for the church. Church I have known depends upon more than that. Okay. You have Quinn agree it was just culture quirk. Okay, we can agree on that, yeah. Well, because I've run 15 minutes past the time, I probably ought to shut up and let you check off. I would love to see each of you on my computer before I do that. I don't know whether I can.
Yes, here.
Oh, I can see. Oh,
There's Jason.
yeah, great. I'm delighted to be able to see, know that others are on. I'm actually that